Welcome back to the Spotlight Business Report. I am Bruce Hamilton. In part 1, we trace the Federal Reserve from its panic-fueled origins in 1913 to the end of the gold standard in 1971. Today, in our conclusion, we look at the Fed's transformation into the world's most powerful economic backstop and the controversy that defines its future in 2026. The 1970s brought stagflation, high inflation, high unemployment, and low growth. By 1979, inflation was running at over 13%. Enter Paul Volcker, the 6'7" chairman who believed that only drastic medicine could save the dollar. Volcker raised the federal funds rate to nearly 20%. Yes, 20%. The economy crashed into a deep recession. Unemployment hit 10.8%. Farmers drove tractors to the Federal Reserve building in protest. But here's the controversial part. It worked. Inflation broke. By 1983, the economy was growing again, and the era known as the Great Moderation began. For the next 25 years, the Fed, now led by Alan Greenspan, was celebrated as masters of the universe. Inflation stayed low, recessions were mild, and the Federal Reserve's balance sheet remained remarkably stable, hovering between 5 and 10% of GDP. The Fed's 2026 note explains, during this period, treasuries dominated the asset side of the balance sheet and currency dominated the liability side. It was a world of scarce reserves, careful targeting, and the illusion of perfect control. That illusion shattered in 2008. September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers collapses, the global financial system freezes. And the Federal Reserve does something unprecedented. It does not just lend to banks. It becomes the buyer of last resort for mortgage-backed securities, for commercial paper, for assets that had never been on a central bank's balance sheet before. The Fed's history states flatly, the scarce reserves regime ended. What does that mean in plain English? It means the Fed stopped worrying about how much money it was creating. Between 2008 and 2014, the balance sheet exploded from roughly 5% of GDP to over 25%. That is $5 trillion in new assets. The Fed was printing money to buy bonds, a policy known as quantitative easing, or QE. Critics called it money printing. Supporters called it necessary emergency medicine. The truth, as always, lives somewhere in between. But here's the key takeaway for investors. After 2008, the old rules no longer applied. The Fed had become the market, and it would take another global crisis to prove just how deep that commitment ran. March 2020. The COVID pandemic shuts down the global economy. And the Fed, remembering the lessons of 2008, does not hesitate. It cuts rates to zero. It launches unlimited QE. It even buys corporate bond ETFs, something no central bank had ever done. The balance sheet, which had shrunk slightly after 2014, exploded again past 30% of GDP. Then came the hangover. By 2022, inflation hit 9%, the highest in 40 years. The Fed, now led by Jerome Powell, reversed course at record speed. It raised rates 11 times. It began shrinking the balance sheet again. And as of early 2026, that process continues. But here is the new wrinkle. In January 2026, news broke that the renovation of the Eccles Building, the Fed's Washington headquarters, had ballooned to $2.5 billion. The Department of Justice issued subpoenas. The White House demanded investigations. For a central bank that prides itself on independence, the political heat has rarely been higher. Which brings us to the question every investor is asking: what comes next? 3 trends will define the Fed for the next decade. First, the balance sheet will continue shrinking, but it will never return to pre-2008 levels. Ample reserves is the new normal. Second, the Fed is actively researching a central bank digital currency, a digital dollar that could eventually replace physical cash. The privacy implications alone will ignite political firestorms. Third, and most immediately, the Fed is fighting to preserve its independence. With $2.5 billion in renovation cost overruns drawing criminal investigations, with presidential candidates threatening to take control of monetary policy, the Federal Reserve is facing its greatest political challenge since the 1970s. Jerome Powell said in January 2026, "The DOJ inquiry is a pressure campaign led by the White House. Denials aside, the message is clear. The Fed's golden age of deference may be ending." So here is the bottom line. The Federal Reserve began as a compromise, a reluctant response to the panic of 1907. It grew into a wartime financier, stumbled through the Great Depression, conquered inflation under Volcker, and became the world's most powerful economic backstop after 2008. Today, as we move through 2026, the Fed is shrinking its balance sheet, defending its independence, and debating whether to create a digital dollar. Jerome Powell has said repeatedly, "We have to balance being the lender of last resort with being accountable to the public." Whether that balance can hold in the current political climate is the single most important question for global financial markets. The Federal Reserve is 112 years old, and for the first time in a generation, its future is genuinely uncertain. This has been the Spotlight Business Report. I am Bruce Hamilton. Thank you for watching.